Today on Inspired Money.
I recently said, you can't control the event, but you can control how you respond to it. So you got to rewrite the script. It is prime time for anyone looking to reinvent their life right now.
This is episode 144 with life coach and New York Times bestselling author, Coach Mike Baer. Welcome to Inspired Money. My name is Andy Wong, a managing partner at Runnymede Capital Management. Each week, we bring you an interesting person to help you get inspired, shift your perspectives on money, and achieve incredible things. From making it to giving it away, Inspired Money means making a difference, creating something bigger than oneself, and maybe, just maybe, making the world a better place. Thank you for joining me. Hey, Inspired Moneymaker, welcome back. If this is your first time with us, welcome. Today we're talking to Mike Baer. He's CEO of the Rehab CAS Centers. He's worked in mental health and personal development for over 17 years. He's a best-selling author. Jennifer Lopez, J-Lo, Jenny on the Block, endorsed his book, saying he challenges people to strive to live authentically. His book is a must-read for anyone who wants to thrive in all areas of life. He also makes frequent appearances on the Dr. Phil Show.
He has experience, he's got credentials, he knows what he's doing, he has a whole team of life coaches. He works with everything from A-list celebrities to everyday folks.
In this episode, you'll learn self-awareness exercises to be your best self, what it means to follow your authentic path, and money and happiness. Now let's get inspired with Coach Mike Baer. Coach Mike, welcome to Inspired Money. I'm so excited to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Andy.
Let's jump right in. What's your earliest childhood memory of money?
My earliest childhood memory of money was going to my father's closet. He used to keep change, pennies, quarters, nickels into one of those giant, it's almost like a plastic Coca-Cola bottle. Back then, piggy banks were piggy banks. We kept changing them. And so I remember sitting on weekends, rolling his change, and he would give me like 5% of whatever I rolled. And then I just remember how excited I was to be able to put, 40 quarters equals $10?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it was those $10 quarter rolls were the prime time.
That's cool. So he was paying you for your services.
Exactly. Yeah. And I gladly rolled those pennies, nickels, and quarters.
Yeah. Nowadays, you'd have a machine that you could go to the bank and just dump them all into, and it would count it for you.
Yeah. Or people mainly will use their credit cards. They won't need the change for the meters.
Well, that's a cool memory. Coach Mike, you're regular on the Dr. Phil Show. You've helped a lot of people. In your book, Best Self, Be You, Only Better, you ask the question, do you believe you are currently living your best life? And a surprisingly high number of people answered no. What's the problem there in your view?
In Best Self, it's really a book that helps people figure out authentically what is right for them. And so really often we see people who end up becoming, I'm sure you've seen too, Andy, like someone is an attorney and their parents were attorneys, or one of the parents were attorneys. Or same goes with physicians, or going to college, and there's or they go to the college that, their parents went to, were an alma mater of. And a lot of it is not to say it's not great. It's just, it's almost expected based upon a family system that someone grows up in. And the same applies to different cultures, right? In terms of academics and thriving and success. And what I've found is a lot of people, when they really take the time to look at their life, they aren't doing everything that they actually want to do. And sometimes it's just a small pivot. And for other people, it's a reinvention of their life. But in terms of living like what I would call the best life, it's living a life that's in alignment with who you are and what you really want.
I noticed in the book, to me, it sounded like really trying to wrestle to find what is your authentic self versus who we believe we are or who we believe we're supposed to be.
Yeah. So for you, for example, Andy, like what growing up do you believe your parents wanted you to be?
I think the stereotypical answer should be that they'd want me to be a doctor or lawyer, being like Asian parents. My father was an immigrant to the United States. Surprisingly, my parents were pretty open-minded in that I don't think that they were really putting pressure on me and my brother to become a doctor or lawyer. My father was not pushing me to be an artist. He wasn't saying, go be an artist. He wanted his kids to be able to provide for themselves. And he had a concern that being a quote unquote starving artist may not be the best path.
Right. And I think too, there's some reality between a starving artist who's a step away from a lot of success and a starving artist who just doesn't really have what it takes to have success. I think it's not at all to say that someone isn't being authentic because of just how they grew up, but it's more about like what truly gets someone driven in their own life, whether it be in their relationships or whether it be how do they show up. For a lot of people, it's just figuring out what does authenticity mean to themselves. In the book, I actually had people create, they write down the characteristics of when they feel like they're being truly authentic. So it could be, like for me, it's wise and considerate and compassionate and fun and not thrown by life's circumstances, but able to, kind of move easily. And in the book, we had people create something that represents it. They actually draw it. So in my case, it's a wizard named Merlin. And so when I feel like I'm being at my best, I would say, oh, I'm being like my wizard Merlin. And then what I have people do is figure out what characteristics they have inside themselves that are keeping them from being their best, which we all have different moments in our lives where we say to ourselves, like, this doesn't feel right, or this isn't like me, or I didn't parent in a way like where I yelled at someone or I argued or I was in the ego, and everyone's different. And in the book, we have people create what I call your anti-self. And it kind of plays into people's, the notion from back in the day about angel and devil on the shoulder, but really defining it from more of a authentic and the other part being the ego. And I do have them do the same thing. Mine happens to be a male witch. Because I think male witches don't have any friends and they're insufferable and they are just annoyed with themselves and everyone around. And I would say when I get into a state of certain events in my own life, that's when I would define that keeps me from being authentic. And the reason why we create characters and a lot of the work I do is so that, someone who's 10 years old can do this or someone who's 70 years old. And it also adds a little bit of humor instead of just saying, I'm wrong or I'm angry or I'm bad. By adding some color to it, I find that people can really resolve it easily.
Yeah, I like the exercise. I was going through that process myself last night. So the key here is that it's about awareness, right? So that you're acknowledging your strengths and your weaknesses.
Yeah, I think it's acknowledging your strengths and acknowledging what in your life currently feels really off. If anything, some people, it all feels aligned. I think during this period of time, it's especially important during COVID-19 to understand who someone is as a person, because so many of the structures that one has set up, whether it be routines and work and overall well-being, have now been shifted. What I've noticed is it's tapping back into who someone authentically is, because it can be very confusing when life circumstances cause every aspect of one's life to change.
Are you seeing people experiencing different problems? And I'm kind of curious for you, how do you deal with it? Because I'm assuming that under normal circumstances, you were traveling quite a bit.
I think there's two parts. So one is the people that I do these support empowerment groups every week and go on Facebook and Instagram. And I've noticed there is definitely an increase in new challenges for people. I own a treatment center. I've owned a dual diagnosis center for over 14 years called CAST Centers. We've gone completely to online treatment, which historically in the treatment industry, there was never anything other than talking to a therapist online. And so now we've had to adapt and do group.
You did that after coronavirus. That was a pivot afterwards, or you had done that already?
Yeah, that was a pivot after. And everyone in kind of the treatment industry who has an outpatient has had to do that now. And so with that comes, a lot of pivots and challenges, but then there's also a lot of opportunity in it too. In terms of my own life, without a doubt, there's been big shifts that weren't a part of my life. Everything's changed for the most part in terms of like the structure of life for me.
Yeah, I think for everybody around the world, we're all going through this similar experience that does require us to make some drastic changes in our life. From what I know about you, that kind of suits you because it sounds like you're a lifetime learner. So you probably embrace making some of those changes, or maybe your personality is adaptable to those changes.
I've reinvented my career many times. I've been in mental health for almost 18 years. So for me, normally I feel like I'm more inspirationally in control of my own reinvention. I'm sure we all are. Whereas now it's like, okay, it's time to reinvent. So, I'm not used to that process of it. Like, okay, now's the time to reinvent. But I feel like the first step is really accepting it is what it is. And then the next step is, what choices do I want to make now based upon this new lifestyle that align with who I am, right? Like, what changes have happened in your life?
Big changes. I mean, where I used to drive to work about 20, 25 minutes and go to an office, which, it's a small business, small office, but that's changed. Every day I wake up and I come down to the basement office. My 3 kids and my wife are upstairs, and the kids are going through school online. I'm doing online meetings. Yeah, I mean, the communication's similar, but the physicality of our routine is completely changed.
What for you has been more challenging aspects of it?
In week 1, looking back to that time, I think the biggest challenge was finding the routine, because we didn't know what the kids' school routine looked like. We needed to create an actual sheet of paper that said at 9:00, you're going to have breakfast. At 9:30, you're going to do some schoolwork. And then we have quiet time built in. We have free time built in for the kids. And I think my schedule is a little different because I'm going down. It's as if I'm in the office. I'm just at home. But for the kids, certainly, it was like, what does their day look like? They no longer have gym class, but they can still have a dedicated time for physical activity.
Right. So it sounds like the structure was a lot of the big changes, and families spending a lot more time together now, right?
That's right. I think, for everybody that's different. I think that we've done okay with that. We have our frustrating moments like everybody else, but net, we're doing okay there. Yeah, I think that some families find that there's more conflict because of that closeness and proximity all the time.
Seems like there's a whole lot of new dynamics that happen for a lot of families. But it sounds like you guys have really figured out a rhythm that's working for you.
Well, so far so good. It's a it's an evolution and a process. What do you find with clients who you work with? The big change with the situation that we're in now with coronavirus is that it's the stimulus that is outside of our control. I mean, I hear you saying that it's one thing when inspiration for change is coming from within you, but this is like an external factor that forces people to change for survival in some cases, right? For a business, it's about how does your business survive? You either change or you have little to no revenue.
I recently said, you can't control the event, but you can control how you respond to it. So you got to rewrite the script. It is prime time for anyone looking to reinvent their life right now. For those that are looking to reinvent, whether that be following a new passion, but then there's the people who, live paycheck to paycheck and are looking to try to find a new job. I just looked earlier today, there was something between like Amazon and a few other, major companies. They're looking to employ, 450,000 people. And between all three, I'd have to look up the stat, but the thing is there's a lot of opportunities out there. I think it's first understanding what you want. I feel like even though everyone is going through this, I feel really bad or sad for the people who don't have like the luxury that I have. And what I mean by that is they don't have the finances, they don't have family, and they've lost their job, or they're illegal immigrants whose families moved here and the kids are here, right? I think that's one category of people. And then the other category to me is people who need to use this time to reevaluate and best improve their life. Like some of the clients I've worked with, they're really happy because they don't have to fly to London to take a business meeting anymore. That they realize now from this, they can stay at home and do it over Zoom and save 2 days and be with their family. Whereas before they were flying around the world. Like for me, I was, I speak at different events and work with different companies. And so that's all been paused. And that's a luxury for me. It's a bummer in theory, but how does one best navigate their life from a place of who they are and what they want? I think for a lot of people, if they can use this moment to be more in alignment with who they are and operate from that as their compass, like whether it be looking for a new job, because when we're in stress and anxiety, that doesn't actually help us. We're not as great, where our energy is not as focused. We don't show up in the present moment because there's this thing that lingers. And if we're able to get in alignment with who we are throughout this process and not get thrown by anxiety and stress, we come out to the other side as being really resilient.
Coming up, we talk about working for purpose, self-awareness exercises, money and happiness, all that and more right after this short break. The show notes for this episode can be found at inspiredmoney.fm/144. If you're listening in your car or wherever you are, check the show notes if you want to learn more about Coach Mike and other things mentioned in this episode. It's time for the Runnymede Money Tip of the Week. 2 weeks ago, we talked with Derek Sivers. I got great feedback on that episode. Thank you so much for that. In that show, Derek issued this question and challenge for us.
You know what? I would love it if anybody listening to this show, including you, if you have a recommendation for a philosophical book about money. Have any of you found a book about what to do after you get rich? And nobody has. There's a bunch of books on how to get rich, but nobody talks about what to do after you get rich. I'm fascinated in the subject, if anybody's found anything on that subject.
I have received recommendations from you. So we've got the beginnings of a list. I want to highlight 5 of them. The first one is The Soul of Money, Transforming Your Relationship with Money and Life by Lynne Twist. Thank you, Kate Olker, for sending this in. The description says, this liberating book shows us that examining our attitudes towards money, earning it, spending it, and giving it away, offers surprising insight into our lives. Next up, Beyond Wealth, The Roadmap to a Richer Life by Alexander Green. Thank you, Rocky Lalvani, our guest from Inspired Money episode 24. New York Times bestselling author Alexander Green takes things right down to brass tacks. We are here for a short time. Knowledge is limitless. Therefore, the most critical knowledge is not any particular skill, but rather wisdom about how to live. Fortunately, men and women have had several thousand years to think about what it means to live the good life. And the answers found here, from Plato to Aristotle to Mahatma Gandhi and Stephen Hawking, will both surprise and delight you. Based on that description and the title, this sounds quite along the lines of what Derek Sivers is searching for. This next one was named a couple of times, always a good sign, The Go-Giver, a little story about a powerful business idea by Bob Burg and John David Mann. Thank you, Scott Henderson. The Go-Giver tells the story of an ambitious young man named Joe who yearns for success. Joe learns that changing his focus from getting to giving puts others' interests first, and continually adding value to their lives ultimately leads to unexpected returns. Imparted with wit and grace, The Go-Giver is a classic bestseller that brings life to the old proverb, "Give and you shall receive." The next book was recommended by Chuck Jaffe, The 7 Stages of Money Maturity, Understanding the Spirit and Value of Money in Your Life. In this groundbreaking book, renowned Buddhist teacher George Kinder, a Harvard-trained certified financial planner, demonstrates how we can literally transform our lives emotionally and financially by achieving money maturity, a full understanding of the spiritual and psychological issues surrounding our money lives. And then the last one is a classic novel not known specifically as a money book. It's Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. It's the story of the quest of Siddhartha, a wealthy Indian Brahmin who casts off a life of privilege and comfort to seek spiritual fulfillment and wisdom. I don't know if all 5 of these books quite fit what Derek's looking for, but consider giving them a read and let's see. Of course, these come in addition to the books that Derek mentioned, Enough by John Bogle and How to Get Rich by Felix Dennis. I'm going to add these to Derek Sivers' show notes at inspiredmoney.fm/142. That's the Runnymede Money Tip of the Week. Inspired Money is brought to you by Runnymede Capital Management. We help you to plan, invest, and worry less. Let's do something fun on social media. If you read one of the books mentioned in this episode, take a photo of the cover and tag me. On Instagram, that's inspiredmoney.fm. On Twitter, it's Runnymede Cap. Or you can take a screenshot of this podcast and tag me. If you do that, I look forward to connecting with you. You're listening to Inspired Money. I'm Andy Wong. Mike, you talk a lot about darkness versus hope or light. What have you learned from your personal experiences? Because I know that in your early 20s, you went through a dark time. As a kid, did you know what you wanted to be career-wise when you grew up?
No, it was a mess. I didn't even know how people worked 40 hours a week. You know, I got held back twice in kindergarten and 8th grade. I didn't do well academically. I had a brother and sister who did really well. The youngest of 3. Like, it's interesting because growing up, I felt the opposite of being authentic. Like, I played sports, even though I was really good, captained the basketball team, won with the high school homecoming queen. Like, I did it because I thought that was what I was supposed to do. I wanted people to like me. And I also just struggled a lot with emotional issues and started experimenting in drugs at a young age and eventually got addicted to crystal meth. I went to New York to play basketball at Fordham, but didn't even step out onto the court, ended up dropping out after 2.5 years, failing out of college. I called my parents and asked them to get me into treatment. You know, once I got sober at 22 years old, that's when I realized that when we go through tough moments in our life and we're able to connect or help others transition in their life, it feels really in line. Like it feels like purpose comes alive.
Does that refer to you becoming an alcohol and drug counselor and an intervention counselor?
I became an alcohol and drug abuse counselor. Then I did interventions and flew around the world. Someone had a employee or a family member who was struggling, I was called upon. So I traveled for, maybe 8 years. And then I started a treatment center in my apartment with one group a week. And then now I've transitioned that into a, incredible program. I've had so many different roles. It's like I went from drugs to psychiatric disorders to entertainers and crises to business executives making more money to working with corporations to then a few years ago, I started going on Dr. Phil and became on his advisory board. I never had a vision of being on television ever. And that I feel like came to me just by being myself.
In those early days, what was driving you? I'm assuming it wasn't money.
No, it wasn't. It was purpose. It was feeling like I was adding to this world and contributing. Human beings are kind of infinite. So it's like you never have mastered anything in it because everyone is uniquely different. Everyone has their own story. Everyone has their own culture and childhood. And so to me, it's just always been extremely interesting just because there's so many layers to all of us.
Mike, as you look back to some of those transitions in your life, because some of them are major, especially going from being addicted to drugs to becoming clean and then helping others who were addicted to drugs. Do your definitions today of your best self being Merlin and then your worst self, the anti-self, being a male witch, do those still surface as you look back at the path of your life, or have those changed so much that today's definitions don't apply to like the 20-year-old you?
That's an interesting question. My best self has not changed. By that, I mean the feeling of when I know when I'm being myself without fear or worry or any negative emotion. The anti-self, I feel like that kind of morphs. It's funny. I was actually sitting earlier today meditating. I'm in the process of writing my next book. The first book did really well. And being someone that really struggled in school, writing a book is exhausting. However, I know it's like the last book made New York Times a bunch of times, and like it even went number one in Korea. So clearly the results have been where people connect to what I'm writing. But earlier today, I was just feeling really stuck and frustrated. Just like, how do I best explain something? And, because this book is due in a week. I literally sat there and went like, all right, well, how would Merlin handle it? I mean, I'm 40 years old, right? It just sounds so silly. And by the way, I've done this with a ton of business executives too, and it works. And literally, like, the answers come of what you're supposed to do when you get out of all those anxieties and stressors. I think it's challenging for people when they actually, it's kind of like the stoner who thinks he writes the best music when he's stoned. Some people, which I've worked with a lot of musicians, we can't rewind time and see for those 2 hours what other two songs could have been created sober. Like, who knows? But it's a belief, right? Like, it is a belief. Oh, if I'm stoned, I'm a better songwriter. Okay. You also like getting stoned, right? So it's like two parts to it. But the same relates to people who have anxiety or stress, to be like, no, I work really well when I'm stressed. And it's like, well, no, I mean, I imagine the work product's even better when you're not. I think it's just about getting self-awareness and then making a decision to have a more freeing way of operating. And I have wizards all over my house. I even have it tattooed on my arm to remind me.
It keeps you on track, it sounds like, especially when times are difficult, or if you're confused, or if you are stressed, you need that reminder.
Yeah. And the thing is, everyone who creates whatever their best self is, like, you could do this with your kids and family, and it's a great self-awareness exercise. That's really fun. I've gone into a lot of schools and done this. What I love about it is no one has the same two answers. I think, to me, that speaks to somebody authentically expressing how they see themselves in this world creatively. And I just love that it's unique to each person.
Yeah, as I went through the exercise, I liked that the book had descriptive words so that I could just circle them. When I got to the naming your character, I found that a little bit challenging because I wasn't sure what to do. So I wanted to share with you that coincidentally, my college classmates who I've been communicating with since we've been stay at home and shelter in place, they had sent this link that it's a website where there's a questionnaire and then it's automatically spitting out a fictional character that matches the answers that you put.
Like an avatar.
Like an avatar. And I thought that was cool because I figured that it was sort of a cheating way to come up with an answer. I mean,
what avatar did you get assigned?
I got assigned, I think it's General Youre, who is a character from an animated Avatar series that I'm not familiar with. But I went to the Wikipedia last night and I was reading the description of this character. And I've got to say, I think it does sound similar to how I think of myself.
Oh, it's great.
At least the strengths. I mean, the strengths that I wrote down were good-natured, creative, agreeable, sensible, content, hardworking, good-humored. And when I read the Wikipedia description of this fictional character, I'm like, yeah, it seems like a match.
That's awesome. And do you know the part of you that gets in the way of you being at your best?
I don't think I named the character, but the qualities were angry, impatient, insecure, cynical, stingy, and perfectionist.
Got it. And do you know when that comes out the most?
That comes out, if I'm tired or hungry or stressed out or in rush hour traffic when I need to get somewhere. I'm watching the time tick and I'm getting later and later. That's when it happens.
Yeah, that they say hungry, angry, lonely, tired. And if you got two of them, you're climbing out of the dirt. Just you start to feel it so much.
Coach Mike, some of these exercises and this framework, are these the similar steps that you take celebrities through? Because I know that you've worked with Joe Jonas, Sharon Osbourne. Is it similar?
I mean, everything that's in Best Self is exercises that I do with a client. So anyone I work with, I mean, that was like a season of my life when I wrote that book. That was everything I did with clients then. And then the new season of the book I'm writing now is what, I'm helping people with now, which is about decisions. But yeah, I mean, there's no difference. Pretty much Best Self is I wrote, and it really organizes everything I do with clients. And, there's probably like 50 exercises in the book. And it's all a journey into, evaluating your life and being authentic and figuring out what your goals are now. We cover everything from like spirituality to personal to health, employment, relationships, how you're evolving in life, what your social circles look like. I think I've always been the type that I love such a way where there's also some assessments that aren't like the doctor's office assessments that help someone really define for themselves what they want to work on instead of me telling someone, here's what you need to work on. Like it's how I've been as a coach the whole time. Like my thing's always about, let's work from the place of what's true to you. It's not like, here's what I think is right for you.
Yeah, I like the Sivers acronym. I think that stood for social life, personal life, health, education, relationships, employment, and spiritual development. It sounds like a very balanced approach. Since this show is called Inspired Money, I wanted to ask you specifically your thoughts on money. I've heard you talk about a happy barista versus a celebrity or musician client who is very wealthy, but not happy. You took a trip to Kurdistan, and I think you said those with the least in terms of worldly possessions seem to possess the most hope. And then also you even reference in this conversation that you've worked with CEOs who are troubled. They may live in a mansion, but they're terribly unhappy. So how does money fit into happiness?
I think money creates opportunities, but I also think money takes away connection, just in a general sense, right? Like the last book that I wrote, I was at a certain publisher, and I moved to this publisher, and my agent was like, "You're not going to get as much money." And I said, "Well, it's not about the money." I haven't had great results when I've been focused about just the money. I admire people who can do it that way. I just haven't had that. Like my brother, he's a very successful coach as well. He's my older brother, and he has really detailed, organized plans and in terms of like his business model. And I've always been less structured around it. To me, money is this thing that just creates more opportunity and safety. But then it's kind of like, at what point does it become enough money? At what point does it become making money versus spending time with kids or pursuing hobbies and passions? I've had some clients that I've worked with who, make tens of millions of dollars a year, and they're really focused on money. I feel like it's to be honest, I just think it depends on who the person is. I go back to authenticity because there's no one size fits all with money. Everyone's relationship to money is different. So it's like some people inherit a lot of money that I've worked with, and those people struggle differently than the people who worked for their money, who always think it's going to be taken away if they grew up with less money. So I'm kind of hopping around as I'm thinking it through as you're talking to me.
It makes me wonder, because when I look at those pages in your book with different characteristics to describe oneself, and you're trying to define your best self versus your anti-self, money's not going to be one of them. I mean, if you are in alignment with who you are, hopefully money is a byproduct of following that authentic path. Rarely is money the actual characteristic that somebody's in alignment with, right?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I mean, from my experience, it's about how someone spends their time doing what they love, not spend their time so they can make money. The people who do that, I find, aren't as fulfilled in their life.
You have a great example in your book, a CEO named Wyatt.
Yeah, I did an intervention a long time ago, was working with somebody who a wife had hired me because her husband was a very successful executive and alcoholic. Had gotten to the point where there was some abuse and affairs, and I was brought in to assist the wife, and they had little kids, and she kept telling me how intimidating he was. And I flew out there and went to this huge mansion with an elevator and everything. And I remember, what happens is I'll meet with people in advance, and then we'll do the intervention typically the next morning before someone starts drinking for the day or using drugs or what have you. And I remember I was young, like I had to borrow my dad's suit when I first started doing interventions because I couldn't afford to buy a suit. And my dad's taller than me, so I was wearing like kind of this oversized suit with bad shoes. This guy, Wyatt, comes, you can hear his footsteps in the house, and you just hear this like all silent, but these like creepy footsteps. And then instead of, I think, even saying, "Hello, how are you?" he walked in a big circle around me, like looking at me and trying to intimidate me. And my response, like I don't get afraid in those situations. I kind of just kicked off my shoes and got comfortable, and he tried to kick me out. And it's also the wife's house, so he couldn't.
It helps that you're 6'5".
Yeah, it helps that I'm tall. And it helps that I think that's where I was saying your story becomes your life, because it helps when you've been through challenges, you feel pretty resilient, and you're not going to allow somebody with a lot of money to just prevent you from helping the wife who's struggling. Long story short, he went to treatment and got sober, and it was pretty intense before then. But a lot of people have asked me about that story in the book, but it's a real story. Every story in all my books are real stories.
That's great. And it sounds like he found his alignment, because I think that he opened up a horse therapy camp. I mean, that's serving his purpose.
Yeah, I had to change some of the details, but yes, in that vein, because I wouldn't want that person feeling like I'm telling their story, because they should be able to tell their own story.
Well, thank you for sharing that story. I like to ask all the Inspired Money guests, how do you define success?
I define success by living a life that's congruent or aligned with who you are. That's how I define success.
Simple.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Coach Mike, for sharing your story and your tools with us. Can you tell the Inspired Money listener, besides watching Dr. Phil, where can they find more information about you and follow you?
Sure. Somebody can go to any social media platform, Coach Mike Bayer, that's BAYER, and CoachMikeBayer.com has a lot of information about me. I offer a lot of kind of these empowerment groups. They're free every week. And I get some really creative people. Like last week, I had Lady Gaga's creative director doing some movement exercises with a whole group of people all over the world while they're sitting in the chairs. And, I have people doing meditation and next week. So you're welcome to be a part of anything we're doing. And it's free.
Thanks so much, Coach Mike.
Thank you.
So what was your favorite Inspired Money moment? I liked Mike's best self and anti-self. It does sound silly, but I can see how acknowledging your strengths and weaknesses can be a very effective way to help you recognize what's happening in a given moment and how to get yourself back on track. I'm also going to leave a link for the comic character survey that I talked about. I really enjoyed doing that, and maybe you will too. And then the new book that Mike referenced that he's working on while we were recording this, it looks like it's scheduled for release this October, and the title is One Decision, The First Step to a Better Life. Keep an eye out for it. Don't forget to take a screenshot of this podcast and tag me on social media. Let's connect on social. I'm at inspiredmoney.fm on Instagram or at RunnymedeCap on Twitter. If you can't remember, I'll put my social links at inspiredmoney.fm/Andy. That's inspiredmoney.fm/Andy. Inspired Money is edited by Christopher Wright of Wright Media. Thank you so much for joining me today. Come back next week. We're going to have another great show. The music you're listening to right now and all other music on today's show is by the amazing Jim Kimo West. Have an inspired week and do something that scares you, because that's where the magic happens.